Hello, my name is Don Moore. I am the president of the Saginaw River Marine Historical Society. Thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel where you can find many of our lectures over the past few years. The speaker for this video is Robert Myers. Robert is the Director of History Programming for the Historical Society of Michigan in Lansing. His talk is about Michiganders on the Titanic. I hope you enjoy this presentation.
Program tonight is on Michigan and the Titanic. And how many of you have heard of the Titanic? Oh, okay, good. All right, well, I guess thanks for coming to the program. No, the Titanic is really, it's certainly the most famous shipwreck in history and world history. It is a part of world's popular culture. And so tonight, because we pretty much all know the story. The ship hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank, right? All right. So, and fess up, how many of you saw the movie, I don't know, what's it been, 20 years ago? Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet? Okay, yeah, you saw. All right. Which, by the way, the movie's pretty historically accurate. I mean, you have the love story, but the recounting of the events that night are really quite accurate. But Titanic, yeah, part of world's popular culture. The movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, Billy Zane, all kinds of movies. Titanic, or the books. Like Raise the Titanic, Clive Cussler's thriller, the Titanic, End of a Dream, one of the best recountings of the disaster, written by Win Craig Wade, a Michigan author. Musicals, The Unsinkable Molly Brown. There's a musical called Titanic, which I guess isn't very good, but there is one. So yeah, it's a part of the world's popular culture. So we're going to talk some of the maybe lesser known information about Titanic, the anatomy of a disaster, what we can learn from it, because we can learn from it. And the role that Michigan played. Now, just to give you a little bit of a background with the history of the Titanic, it was born here, Harland and Wolff Shipbuilders, which is still there, Belfast, Northern Ireland. And this is the drawing room of Harland and Wolff. The ship in the background is either Olympic or Titanic. There were going to be 3 Olympic-class passenger liners that the White Star Company contracted for with Harland and Wolff. The first one was Olympic, the second one was Titanic, and the third one was probably going to be Gigantic. And that kind of goes with the mythological characters, the Olympians, the Titans, the Giants. Well, after Titanic went down, White Star thought, that's a little bit of a hubris, maybe. So they renamed, Gigantic became Britannic. And you might notice that all of them end in IC. And that was a convention with White Star Line. So Olympic, Titanic, Britannic, they all ended with an IC. She was designed by these two men, William Peary on the right and Thomas Andrews on the left. Particularly Thomas Andrews were the chief designers. And of course they had all kinds of designers that you saw there in the drawing room. But these are the two men that created the Olympic-class steamers. Now, White Star contracted with Harland and Wolff to build these liners on a cost-plus basis. So the idea was, instead of telling Harland and Wolff, you have X number of dollars or pounds to build these steamers, they told them, build the best steamers you can. We will pay the cost plus your profit. So they really had carte blanche to build the best steamers they could. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons, was that White Star wanted to compete with its arch rival Cunard, the other great British transatlantic steamer company. And there are many ocean liner companies working the North Atlantic. Cunard, White Star are two of the biggest ones, but also like the Hamburg America line out of Germany, Leyland, another British line. There's all of these different companies working the North Atlantic. Primarily what they are doing is carrying passengers in steerage. And we think, well, but we've seen the movie Titanic and those beautiful, luxurious cabins. That's not where the money was. The money was putting people down in steerage, third class or steerage, and carrying lots of them across the Atlantic. That's where the money was. Now, White Star wanted to compete with Cunard in luxury. The Cunarders were the fastest ocean liners on the North Atlantic. Ships like the Lusitania, the Mauretania, the Aquitania. And you might notice that for Cunard, their convention was that they ended in IA. So Lusitania, Aquitania, so forth. So those were, they were the fastest liners on the North Atlantic, about 25, 26 knots. White Star said, we're not going to try to compete with them for speed. We're going to compete instead with luxury. Now, that's a relative term. These Cunarders were luxurious ships too. If you were traveling in first class or even second class, you traveled in style. For example, the Veranda Cafe on the Lusitania or the passengers lounge there, these were beautiful, beautiful ships. About 6-7 days to cross the North Atlantic, and you traveled in style. So think of that the next time you're crammed into an airliner seat eating a bag of peanuts. This is how you traveled back then. Now, White Star was not actually named White Star. It was the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company. Why White Star? Well, it had a white star on its flag, so people knew it as White Star, and it wasn't even a British company. It was owned by J.P. Morgan's International Mercantile Marine. It was a British-owned, or an American-owned company. White Star was a subsidiary. A lot of people in England didn't know that. Now, of course, it was built in Northern Ireland. It was crewed by a British crew. They were all from the UK, but it was actually a American company, United States company. Now, when White Star contracted with Harland and Wolff to build these ships, they didn't have slipways big enough to build them. So they had to take three slipways and combine them down into two just to have something big enough to build them. Now, these were called Olympic class steamers because Olympic was going to be the first one, and that was the class name. So work on the Olympic started first, and then Titanic. Work on Titanic started at the end of March 1909. And so here you see these great new ocean liners taking shape there at Harland and Wolff. Olympic on the right, nearly ready to launch, and then Titanic on the left. And this is launch day, May 31st, 1911. And as you can see, Olympic is already gone. And they're going to be starting what they would have called Gigantic, or now Britannic, on the right-hand slipway, and Titanic there just about ready to launch on launch day. And these ships employed thousands of workers there in Belfast. Everything from riveters to electricians, carpenters, everyone. Now, Titanic was launched, and this is Titanic now during her fitting out process. They would basically launch the hull. And then once the hull was in the water, that great crane there would be used to lower in all the boilers, engines, all that kind of thing into the ship. You can see there are 3 funnels. Titanic had 4. The sternmost funnel was a dummy. So if you watch the James Cameron movie and you see Titanic steaming along, and I hate to break it to you, but that's CGI, no ship. But when you see Titanic steaming along, if you watch closely, there's no smoke coming from the 4th funnel. They got it right. So why did they have 4 funnels instead of 3? Well, Thomas Andrews thought it looked better, for one thing, and the Cunarders had 4. So you got to have 4 on these ships. And it does look a little bit better. Now here's Titanic now nearing completion. Probably or very early, late in 1911, early 1912, 882.5 feet long with a 90-foot beam. Titanic, she was just a hair longer than Olympic. When she was launched and went into service, she was the largest man-made moving object in the world. But technology is changing so fast. Had Titanic survived, she would have been the largest man-made moving object in the world for about 1 year. Other ships were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they are equipped, and the technology, as I said, it's changing so fast. There's now radio, or the British would call it wireless. There's phonographs, there's automobiles, airplanes. The world is changing, and this is an example of it. This is an example of technology in the early 20th century, because people believed, and this is true, that technology was advancing so fast, it was going to solve all the world's problems. Didn't quite work out. But Titanic is emblematic of that. If you traveled in first class on Titanic, you traveled in style. This is a famous grand staircase. The first class cabin ran you for the 6-day voyage about the equivalent now of about $3,000 for traveling in first class. Now, if you were traveling in a parlor suite, like the very elite did, that would run you up around the equivalent of around $85,000 today. But those people had money. These were the Bill Gates, the Jeff Bezos of the time. Now, you might not travel in first class, but if you traveled second class, it was still very luxurious, about $1,200 in today's money, $1,300 in today's money. But as I said earlier, that was not where the money was for the shipping companies. It was hauling immigrants in steerage. White Star called it third class. Other ship companies would call it steerage. This was luxurious steerage compared to many other ships. But you crammed them in there. It was called steerage because you were down near the steering gear of the ship. And it was noisy down there. They were at the bow and at the stern of the ship, so the rocking and everything from end to end, that's where you got all the motion. But you cram a lot of people in there, and that's where you made the money. Now, if you were traveling first class on Titanic on her maiden voyage in 1912, you might have met people like John Jacob Astor IV. His 18-year-old bride, he had earlier an unhappy marriage, divorced his wife, and yes, this did cause a bit of a scandal. He was 47, she was 18. Benjamin Guggenheim, American businessman, traveling with his mistress. He was married, but not to her. And people like Archie Butt, who was a military advisor to President Taft. Ida and Isidore Strauss of Macy's Department Store, traveling first class. These were the elite of society. Now, when you think of, how many of you saw the PBS series Downton Abbey? Did you watch that? Yeah. All right. Think Downton Abbey. You've got the kitchen staff and everything down in the basement. These are the people upstairs in the house, and they never crossed paths. That's one thing that's the movie, I know it had to be a romance story, but Jack and Rose would never have met because he would never be allowed anywhere near first class. Those nasty people in steerage who are uncouth and they might have diseases and that kind of thing. So they were never allowed to associate. On the maiden voyage, J. Bruce Ismay, White Star's managing director, went along. Not because he wanted to do a North American tour or anything like that, but because this was a maiden voyage. He wanted to see how the new ship would handle and what improvements they could make, because remember, Gigantic is coming up next. And they had made improvements from Olympic to Titanic, and they're going to make improvements from Titanic to Britannic or Gigantic. And Thomas Andrews went along as part of the Guarantee Group from Harland and Wolff. The guarantee group was Andrews, the designer, but also electricians and the various fitters and so forth to assess this ship, make any repairs they need, and what improvements can be made for the next one. Now, what about the Michiganders on board? Well, if you'd been in first class, you might have met Dick and Helen Bishop. They were from Dowagiac. Dick Bishop had married really well because his wife was the heir to the Round Oak Stove Company in Dowagiac. You probably have never heard of it. But if you'd lived back then, you would have, because you probably would have a round oak stove in your house. Fabulously wealthy. Well, his wife died tragically very soon after they were married. He remarried, and he then had the Round Oak Stove Company. So he was enormously wealthy, and his wife Helen, his second wife, her family had a big chair company. So they got married, they're doing this European tour and coming back on Titanic. Now, if you'd been in second class, you might have met the Becker family, Ruth Becker from Benton Harbor. She was there with her mother Nellie, siblings Marion and Richard. They were missionaries in India, and they were coming back from India. They got as far as England, and the youngest child, a toddler, fell ill. And Ruth's father said, well, Nellie, you take the other children to America on Titanic, and I'll follow you later once our child gets better, which probably saved his life. Lots of people traveling third class on Titanic, from either coming to Michigan or coming back from Europe on tours, like the Skoog family. They were from the Upper Peninsula, a lot of Yoopers on Titanic. The Skoog family, they were miners up there in Iron Mountain, and they come back from visiting the old country, and they bring a couple of relatives along with them. Maud Sincock from Houghton, her father was a miner up in Houghton in the copper mines. Ida Anderson going to the Lower Peninsula in Manistee and traveling third class. Frank Andrew was in second class. He was another miner from Cornwall. Tin mines, lead mines in Cornwall. Those people know mining, and where are their jobs? In the UP, iron mines, copper mines up there. Stephen Jenkin coming back in second class. Not all of these people, these miners, were traveling steerage. Some they had done okay by themselves. And so he was traveling in second class. And not everybody going up to the UP, a lot of them coming to the Detroit area. What's going on in Detroit? Auto industry. And you've got a guy named like Frank Goldsmith. He's a machinist. You can make a good living as a machinist in Detroit. And so he's coming from Kent, England. So all in all, about 70 people from Michigan on board Titanic. Captain E.J. Smith, rounding out his career. This was probably going to be his last voyage. He had taken Olympic across on her maiden voyage, and now he would take Titanic on hers. Well, Titanic left Belfast for sea trials, April 2nd, 1912. Sea trials were simply taking the ship out, running it around, see how it handled. And here's where the anatomy of a disaster begins and what we can learn from Titanic. First of all, they do the sea trials on April 2nd. The next day, Titanic goes into service. There's no opportunity for the crew to learn the ship. They're all new to it. Most of them have never sailed together before, so the crew doesn't know each other either. And some of them had never even been on the North Atlantic. So now they're all new. It would have been better had White Star delayed. Just give them a week to learn the ship, but that was not the practice. The practice was time's a wasting, money's to be earned. Put it in service the next day. So they go down to Southampton, take on passengers, and then cross over to Cherbourg, France, where they dropped off a few people, took on many more, and then to Cole, Ireland, what's now called Cole. It was Queenstown back then. And they pick up more passengers, again, mostly in steerage, in third class, and immediately head out onto the North Atlantic. On board, about 2,223 passengers and crew. We'll never know exactly how many, but right about that number. And this is almost certainly the last photograph of Titanic as she's leaving Ireland and starting to pick up speed now and heading out into the Atlantic for her run to New York City. Well, famously, Titanic had the best, the most modern and powerful wireless set on the Atlantic, or in the world, really, for a ship. And she had 2 wireless operators, so she could send and receive messages 24 hours a day, around the clock. And the wireless cabin was right behind the bridge, and a number of messages start coming in during the voyage, like this one. And if you can read the script here, it's addressed Captain Titanic. Westbound steamers report bergs, icebergs, growlers, small icebergs, and field ice, and giving the latitude and longitude. So these messages are coming from the wireless room, posted in the chart room where the officers can see them. There's kind of a misunderstanding, if you will, that Captain Smith did nothing with the ice warnings. And that's not true. He actually diverted course south, trying to avoid the ice field, but he did not go far enough south. And the other idea is Titanic was sort of steaming along, and out of nowhere there was an iceberg, and it hit it. Well, that's not exactly true either. Titanic's course took her right into the ice field. So it was not simply an isolated iceberg out of nowhere. There were icebergs all around. And this is what you would have seen that night. You're seeing the icebergs in the distance, and then that white line that kind of looks like haze on the horizon is actually the field ice. So let me set it up for you. The Titanic is steaming through the night. She is not at her full speed yet. They have not lit the last of the boilers. But she is traveling. She does not slacken speed, even though Captain Smith knows that they are going into an ice field. He does not post extra lookouts. There are 2 lookouts up in the crow's nest. Many captains would have put lookouts in the eyes of the ship, down at the bow. Smith did not do that. It was a crystal clear night. One of those, you know how it is in Michigan when we get a night in the winter and it's just so clear. Temperatures drop down, it's about freezing, crystal clear. There's no moon. So it's dark. There's starlight, but that's all. And the water was absolutely calm. People said it was like a mill pond. There was not even a ripple. So the lookouts up in the crow's nest would spot the icebergs not by seeing the iceberg itself, but by seeing the spray from waves hitting the base of the berg. But there's no spray. There's no moon. Captain Smith was relying on the night being very clear that the lookouts would see the iceberg in plenty. If there was an iceberg, they would see it in plenty of time to divert around it. But they couldn't. About 11:40 at night, Frederick Fleet, he is up in the crow's nest with another lookout, Reginald Lee, and he sees an iceberg. He rings the bell 3 times. He calls down to the bridge. They pick up on the phone, just like you see in the movie. They pick up on the phone. What do you see? He says, iceberg, right ahead. First Officer William Murdoch is on the bridge. Captain Smith has gone to bed. He's not gone to sleep yet, but he's turned in for the night. William Murdoch orders hard to starboard. And what he's trying to do is port around the iceberg. So he's going to turn the bow of Titanic to port, to the left, and then he's going, when it clears, he's going to swing the stern around. And you're thinking, wait a minute, he's ordering hard to starboard. Well, imagine a boat's tiller. All right. What he's doing, he's ordering hard to starboard. You turn the tiller to the right. That turns the rudder to the left. The boat bow is going to turn to the left. And so that's what he's trying to do, so that he doesn't scrape along the iceberg. But he doesn't have enough time. He has probably a little less than 30 seconds, and Titanic hits the iceberg, just a slight grinding noise. So there's, sometimes we read that, oh, it opened up this huge 300-foot long gash in the hull. It did no such thing. It popped rivets, buckled plates. It opened up slits in the hull about 3 square meters in size. So imagine your front door at home. That's about the size of the whole opening. So it wasn't this great long gash. Thomas Andrews had designed the Titanic so that she would float with, she had all these watertight compartments along it. And they could be closed with watertight doors. So, and the doors would close automatically with a float, or they could close electronically. William Murdoch immediately ordered the doors closed, so the doors slid down and closed. Titanic was designed so that she could float with 4 watertight compartments filled, or even with 2 compartments adjacent to each other filled with water. She would still float. Why that design? Well, the worst case scenario that the designers could imagine was that Titanic would get T-boned by another ship, and just by bad luck it would hit it right on a bulkhead. And it would open up 2 adjacent compartments to the sea. She would still float. But she was holed in 5 compartments, all at the bow, and so the ship would, as the compartments filled at the bow, it would just draw the ship down until they all flooded and the ship would sink. Well, Captain Smith, and here's the anatomy of disaster we're picking up again. First, we have the crew not being familiar with the ship, being not familiar with each other. We have a clear night, a remarkably clear night with no moon, no waves. But Captain Smith has the great, enormous good fortune of having the designer, Thomas Andrews, on board. So Smith orders the carpenter sound the ship, see how bad the damage is, and the designer himself is there, and he goes with the carpenter, and they come back up to the bridge about midnight, and Andrews informs Captain Smith that the Titanic has been damaged, the compartments are flooded, and Smith asks, and that the ship will sink. Smith asks him, how long do we have? And Andrews tells him about an hour to an hour and a half, and the ship will sink. And Smith freezes. He really issues no coherent orders, and this is another part of the anatomy of the disaster, that you can't predict. How will the captain or the pilot or the driver, how will they react in the face of a disaster? And Smith does not react well. He does go to the wireless cabin. Jack Phillips, the senior operator, is on duty, and he tells Phillips, send the CQD, which was a distress call. It was changing from CQD to SOS, and several ships picked that up. This is CQD SOS. They're sending both signals from MGY, that's Titanic's radio call sign. We have struck icebergs sinking fast, come to our assistance, giving latitude and longitude. That is one thing that Smith did do. He ordered or told the wireless operator, send the CQD. He told his officers, clear the lifeboats and get them ready to launch. That's about all he did. He did not inform his officers that the ship was sinking. Several of them did not know that the ship was sinking. So if you're thinking, well, and you probably all know that they didn't fill the lifeboats to capacity. Why not? They didn't know the ship was sinking. It was a precaution, they assumed. He didn't even wake up all of his officers to make sure that they were there. Harold Lowe, the 5th officer, was awakened by commotion outside his cabin. He'd been asleep. And this is where you need that clear-headed thinking. Call the officers together. Get all of your officers assembled. You know you have about an hour to an hour and a half. Get them assembled. Gentlemen, the ship has been damaged. She is sinking. We have about an hour and a half before this all goes below the waves. I want you to clear the lifeboats away. I want you to go down to get with the stewards. Make sure that everybody down in steerage can get up to the boat deck. Tell them for God's sake, don't start a panic and tell them we're sinking. But tell them it is captain's orders that they come to the boat deck. I want you to do this. I want you to do this. You to do this. Smith does none of that. So I fault Smith. Now, the liner, many of the ships that pick up the Titanic's distress calls are too far away, but the Cunarder Carpathia is about 50 miles away to the southeast. She is headed for the Mediterranean, so she's eastbound. Captain Arthur Rostron, commanding the Carpathia, reacts, and again, this is a study in clear-headed thinking. And it would be worth people who study these things to look at Arthur Rostron. His wireless operator comes running to him. He says, "We've got a message from Titanic. She struck an iceberg and is sinking." Rostron immediately orders and he gives him the latitude and longitude. Rostron immediately orders Carpathia turned around and headed west. And he says to the operator, "Get confirmation of this. Is this on the level?" The operator comes back about 2 minutes later and he says, "Yes, I have confirmed that Titanic is sinking." He gets his officers together and he issues a whole series of commands. He says, first of all, I want the boilers, full power, stoke up those furnaces. I want all of the steam we can get, fastest we can go. I want water turned off, hot water turned off to the cabins just so that we can get everything we've got into the steam for the engines. Said, I want the lifeboats cleared away, get them ready to launch. I want you to alert the doctors aboard ship. Find out what languages they speak and position them in different parts of the ship. I want the gangway doors open so that we can bring people in from the side of the ship through the gangways. I want the galleys rung up. I want hot food, hot water for the survivors. I want ash buckets on ropes because we can bring up infants in ash buckets. I want you to, I forget, there's a whole series of commands. And he said, have flares ready so we can signal to people in lifeboats. And so he issues, you do this, you do this, you do this. And when you have done it, I want you to come back and tell me that you have done it so that I know my orders have been carried out. Remarkable thinking. This is Rostron here receiving a ceremonial loving cup, a silver loving cup that's on the Molly Brown, unsinkable Molly Brown from first class. Jack Phillips, as Titanic is going down, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride stay at their position even after Captain Smith have dismissed them. Now, famously, Titanic did not have enough lifeboats for everyone. She had 14 regular boats with a capacity of 65 each, and then a couple of cutters and collapsible lifeboats, which were basically like a raft with canvas sides. Again, Smith doesn't tell his officers, we are sinking. Fill the lifeboats to capacity. They'll take 65. Make sure each one has 65. And when they have 65 in it, put in some toddlers, infants. We'll chance it. The boats will take it. Well, if you were in first class, you belonged on the boat deck. People like Dick and Helen Bishop went right to the boats, got on board, and were lowered away. The Beckers, they went up to as the ship was sinking, they realized that it was getting a dire situation. Ruth got separated from her mother. Her mother screamed at her, "Ruth, get into another boat," and Ruth did. Titanic fortunately sank on an almost even keel, so they were able to launch all of the lifeboats and all but one of the collapsibles. And here is lifeboat number 6 coming up to Carpathia the next morning. 26 passengers and crew in a boat with a capacity of 65. And returning to New York City with Titanic's 710 survivors out of the 2,223 who were on board. Percentage lost, overwhelmingly in third class. They didn't know how to get to the boat deck. Many of them didn't speak English. They don't belong on the boat deck. If you're in third class and you go to the boat deck, you're going to get in trouble. So they stayed below till it was too late. But even in first class, almost no women, the mortality rate among men was very high. Almost no women lost, only 3, and they all refused to get into the boats. Now, coming back to Michigan. A lot of people from Michigan on board the Titanic. And William Alden Smith, our Michigan senator, is there in Washington, D.C. Now, Smith had a great rise. He came from nothing, poverty. He was born in Dowagiac, moved to Grand Rapids with his family when he was 12 years old. And he rose really through his own initiative. He entered politics. He was Michigan's first game warden up in Sault Ste. Marie. Served in the Michigan House, then the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, U.S. Senate. And by 1912, he's a senator, and he's getting telegrams from his constituents because they've heard all these rumors. Because even before Carpathia comes to New York City, reaches New York City, the rumor mill is going, just like today. It's gone viral. And people are saying, you know, we've heard that E.J. Smith, the captain, was drunk. We've heard that people have found out that J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of White Star, has survived, whereas women and children were lost. There's no response from the wireless operators to messages even from the President of the United States, William Howard Taft. It's because they're trying to sell their story to the New York papers, and they won't even communicate with anyone. We don't know if our loved ones are alive or dead. We've heard about watertight compartments. Could it be that our families are at the bottom of the North Atlantic in one of these watertight compartments? Maybe they're on an iceberg. Is anybody sending a ship out to see if they're surviving on an iceberg somewhere? Well, William Alden Smith knows some of these questions are ridiculous, but he wants to know what's being done. Why did Titanic, was she steaming at full speed trying to beat a speed record, as is alleged? What's being done about this? And he makes an inquiry and he finds out, well, nothing's being done about it. When Carpathia reaches New York City, she's going to drop off survivors and she'll go back to England with the crew and J. Bruce Ismay, and they won't be able to question them. There's a cover-up here. There's a cover-up. Well, Smith is having none of that. He wants some answers. Did J. Bruce Ismay pressure Captain Smith to beat a speed record? Why weren't were third-class passengers kept away from the boat deck so that first-class passengers could survive? Why weren't there enough lifeboats? Did they ignore ice warnings? All of these questions. And so as he's sitting in his office mulling this over, the sheriff, Joe Bayless from Sault Ste. Marie, walked in. And he knew Joe Bayless because he'd been the game warden up there. And he said, you know, Joe, what are you doing here in Washington? He said, well, I'm here on official business. Well, where are you going now? And Bayless told him, well, I'm going back to the Sioux. And Senator Smith said, no, you're not. I'm deputizing you. And I want you to go to New York City, and when Carpathia docks, I want you to slap a subpoena on everybody you can find. And that's what Joe Bayless did. And so Senator Smith, now Titanic went down on April 15, 2:20 in the morning on April 15. On April 19, 4 days later, Senator Smith convenes his inquiry. Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the site of the present day site of the Empire State Building, and he gets answers. And the testimony, by the way, it was taken down verbatim, and it is fascinating reading. Smith simply wears witnesses down. Instead of asking a single question, he questions and questions and questions. And some of his questions are a little bit ridiculous, like, you know, is 48 degrees Fahrenheit above freezing? that kind of thing. But he gets answers. And the Michigan press, the U.S. press, I think very astutely hailed him for asking and getting answers to questions. And some of the questions were things, could people be living at the bottom of the North Atlantic in a watertight compartment? Well, he knew that wasn't possible, but his constituents didn't. The questions needed to be asked and answered. Now, in the middle of the hearing, there's a bombshell. Crewmen from the steamer Californian come to Smith and they tell him that we sat and watched Titanic go down and did not respond. Californian had been stopped for the night in ice. They see another steamer come up, stop, and then begin to send up white rockets. They alert the captain, Stanley Lord, who asks them what color the rockets are. They say white. He said, have you tried to signal them? Well, we did, but we didn't get an answer. And he said, well, keep trying to signal them, and he went back to sleep. They were probably about 11 or 12 miles north of Titanic's position. And arrived that morning just as Carpathia was taking on the last of the survivors. And so now Senator Smith, William Alden Smith, has another question. Is there criminal negligence on the part of the Titanic, of Californian's captain? And these are the positions at the time. Titanic had given her latitude and longitude too far west. She was actually east of the ice field, just about straight south of Californian, probably about 11 miles or so, and about 50 miles northwest of Carpathia's position. Now, Smith conducts his inquiry. A little later, the British conducted their inquiry, and they come to about the same conclusions. Although I think Smith's inquiry is much more in depth. So what he finds is that J. Bruce Ismay did not pressure Smith to beat a speed record. They couldn't. Titanic wasn't that fast. They were never going to break a speed record. But what he finally worms out of the witnesses is, and they're not lying, they're not trying to lie, but they're not always forthcoming either. And what he does get out of them finally is, yeah, we did go into a known ice field, a known ice region at full speed without slackening speed or posting extra lookouts. The third-class passengers were not kept from the boat deck, but no one saw to it that they got up there. The Titanic carried more lifeboats than was required by regulations, but not enough for everyone. The wireless operators were not ignoring questions, messages from people like President Taft, but there was chaos in wireless communications. What took precedence was passenger communications, not things like ice warnings. And that is going to change. They unfairly, I think, excoriated Stanley Lord of the Californian. Had he reacted immediately, they would have arrived right about the time Titanic sank. They would have been trying to fish people out of 28-degree water. Might have saved a few, but only a few. Both inquiries said that he could have saved almost everyone on board. That's nonsense. Now, what of the Michigan passengers? Dick and Helen Bishop survived. They divorced 2 years later. Helen was badly injured in an automobile accident shortly after that and was never the same, died soon afterward. Ruth Becker and her family all survived, went to Benton Harbor where she became a school teacher and rarely ever spoke of Titanic. She said her mother was never the same afterward. Maud Sincock lived to a ripe old age up in Houghton, died in 1984. Ida Anderson, lost at sea. Frank Andrew, lost at sea. The whole Skoog family and their relatives, husband, wife, children, all were lost. Stephen Jenkin, lost. His body was never recovered. Emily Goldsmith and her son Frank did survive. Frank, the father, was lost. He stayed on board and was lost. They lived just outside of Tiger Stadium. And Frank, the son, said one day someone hit a home run. He said the screams from the stadium took him right back to the North Atlantic. So all in all, about 27 of the Michiganders survived. 43 of them were lost. What comes out of it? The so what? Well, part of that is the revelation about the state of anarchy in radio communication. That is going to change. One of the things they find out is Californian had a radio operator, a wireless operator, but he'd gone to bed. There's no requirement that a ship have 24-hour-a-day wireless communication. That changes with the radioactive 1912. From now on, all these ships will have a radio set. Only about half of them did before even have a radio set. All of them will have a radio set, and they will have operators so that it is manned 24 hours a day. 24-hour staffing. This is Jack Phillips at the Titanic set. The International Ice Patrol. It started in 1912. It continues to this very day. Back then it was done with ships. Today we do it with airplanes, but the planes go out and they scout the location of ice fields and icebergs. Continues all these years later. Lifeboats for all legislation. Every ship will have enough lifeboats for everybody on board, which may have been a mistake. Wait a minute. You want to have lifeboats for everybody. This was virtually a unique accident. How many of you heard of the Empress of Ireland? Only a couple of you, yeah. 2 years later, she's rammed, passenger liner, rammed in the fog at the mouth, near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. She had lifeboats for everybody, but they were able to launch only a few of them before she went down. Over 1,000 passengers and crew went down with the ship. Didn't have enough life. They had all the lifeboats they needed, but they couldn't launch them. You've all heard, I'm sure, of the Lusitania. Again, lifeboats for all, but she was torpedoed, went down in 18 minutes. They were only able to launch a few of the boats, and 1,200 people went down with her. Now, why would lifeboats for all be a mistake? How many of you have heard of the Eastland? I see a few hands there. Yeah. Eastland, Great Lakes steamer, owned at the end of her life by the St. Joseph, Chicago St. Joseph company. It was out of St. Joseph, Michigan, by the way, at least. But she was always a little bit top heavy, and the owners acquired the Eastland. Then the lifeboats for all legislation takes effect. They have to put more lifeboats and launching davits on the uppermost deck of this already top heavy ship. The deck had begun to rot from ground moisture. It was actually badly rotted from ground moisture, so the owners fixed that by pouring concrete over the deck. And the first time, about 2 weeks later, she takes on, for the first time, a full load of passengers, 2,500 people. And in the Chicago River, she simply rolled over, being top heavy, she rolled over in the river, and the people drowned like rats. 844 people lost. And she's right there in the Chicago River. That's how close she was. Because of the owners should have gone to prison. Nothing was done, but they should have gone to prison. In fact, so many people, here's a bit of trivia for you. So many people died. They didn't have room enough in funeral homes and morgues in the city, and so they turned a nearby building into a makeshift morgue so families could come and identify the dead there. That building still exists. Until recently, it was Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Studios. William Alden Smith served in the Senate until 1919. His son was a World War I aviator. He died he wasn't killed in action, but died. Smith was never the same afterward. He had wanted to go return to Michigan and practice law with his son. But he stayed in the Senate until 1919, launched the career of Arthur Vandenberg, who would later launch the career of Gerald R. Ford. And Smith died in 1932. Titanic found by Robert Ballard, and we have our Bay City connection, the Nore. The ship that Ballard was aboard was built right here in Bay City in 1967, used for the United States Navy, and then went to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. The Titanic search was a cover story. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. This was a cover story. They wanted to locate and survey the wrecks of the nuclear submarines Scorpion and Thresher, but they didn't want the Soviet Union to know what they were doing. And so the story that went out was that Ballard was looking for Titanic. Actually, he was looking for the submarines, but the Navy said, well, if you find and survey the submarines, we'll finance you a few days to look for Titanic. And so that's what he did, and he found it. But I like to, and I'm going to, yep, I'm right. I told you an hour, and I'm getting there. But I like to think of Titanic not as this rusting wreck on the bottom of the North Atlantic, but of the living ship. This was a wonder of technology for the early 20th century. Britannic, her sister ship that came afterwards, struck a mine in the Mediterranean and went down with a small loss of life. But Olympic, the first of them, went on to a long career. She was known as, I think, Old Reliable, finally scrapped in the 1930s with the Great Depression when she was a little older ship, but went on to a long and illustrious career. And this is what I like to think of, not the shipwreck, but this beautiful marvel of engineering and luxury. So that's the program. Questions, comments, rebuttals? Yeah, in the back.
I know a lady from Bay City, Mrs. Greenland. She worked in Chicago when the Eastland tipped over, and somebody came in the store and said, the boat just tipped over. And she went out and she told me, she said, I wish I would never went out there. There was bodies floating all over the place.
Yeah, the Eastland disaster was horrific. There are several books on it. In fact, a friend of mine wrote her PhD dissertation on Eastland. It was horrific. They were pulling bodies out of the ship, and like you say, bodies out of the Chicago River. Yeah. Somebody, yeah.
My wife and I visited Halifax, Nova Scotia a couple years back. And they've got a cemetery there that has multiple graves of unknown people that came from the Titanic
that they picked up.
Yeah.
Why did they not bring them back to America or take them to their destination?
Yeah, they were the White Star sent out a recovery ship called the Mackie Bennett, and they were tasked with picking up bodies, and then most of them were buried at sea. But they did bring back some that were unknown that they buried there in Halifax, which of course is part of Canada, Dominion of Canada. And then the ones they were looking for particularly were first-class passengers, in part because the first-class passengers would have large estates to settle, and having recovered the body, they could prove that that person was in fact deceased. Anything else? Yeah?
When I was looking on 6th Street, there was a lady across the street. She was on the Carpathia when it was coming across, but she said she was only about 5 or 6 years old, so she didn't remember too much of it, but she remembers being on that boat that rescued the people. People
from Michigan were on Carpathia. In fact, there was was an uncle and nephew, I think, from Alpena who were on board Carpathia, and they said, oh, guess what? We have to turn around and go back to New York City. Yeah. Yes, Tim?
Did the designer of the ship go down with the ship?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Tim. Yes, Thomas Andrews was lost with Titanic also. There's a variety of stories and as did Captain Smith, variety of stories as to what happened to them. One is that in the movie, Thomas Andrews is pictured in the passenger salon That's where one witness said he was. Captain Smith at the bridge. Other people said no, they last saw them trying to launch some of the help launch some of the lifeboats. We'll never know. All right, well, I've kept you a long time. I want to just give you a quick ad here for Historical Society of Michigan. We publish Michigan History Magazine and Chronicle. We'd love to have you as a member or a subscriber. If you are a member of Historical Society of Michigan, you automatically get both magazines. And I brought our most recent one, copy here. It has our cover story on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and please help yourself to a copy of that if you'd like it. But we'd love to have you as a subscriber or a member. If you want to subscribe, you can do that tonight, or you can go online, and we have a coupon code on our website. Just use Bob, all capital letters, my name, and it'll take $5 off, because our staff says, Bob, anybody that listens to one of your programs deserves to get $5 off. Chronicle is our members magazine, and so you can just subscribe to Michigan History, or if you're a member, you get both of the magazines. They both have feature articles and so forth, but Chronicle has a lot of member news and things like that. We have a History Hounds lecture program. It's virtual. You don't have to go to Lansing, but it is virtual through Zoom. And if you are a member of Historical Society of Michigan, you can attend that free every week. Alternate Tuesdays at noon, alternate Wednesdays at 7 in the evening. Or if you are a member of this fine organization, you get to attend free also, because it is free to anyone who is a member of one of our member organizations. Because we like to thank our member organizations, help them with membership and retention and recruitment. And support the Saginaw River Marine Historical Society. You know, our local societies are so important to the preservation of our history, the interpretation of our history, keeping those stories alive, learning from the past, and they need our help. They need our help. And so they do great work, and I'd really encourage you. How many of you are members here? Oh, great. You know, most of you are members. If you're not, pony up. Time to pony up here. All right. So we'd love to have you. Certainly we'd love to have you as a member of Historical Society of Michigan, but we'd also, if you're not a member of the Saginaw River Marine Historical Society, please do consider, no, don't please consider joining. Do join. Do join.